42 brand new primetime shows hit American television in the fall of 1995, a record that no season before it had come close to touching. Most of them crashed before viewers even learned the characters' names, and today we're counting down the 10 biggest TV flops from that wild, overcrowded year to figure out what went so wrong for so many shows all at once. If you love forgotten TV, behind-the-scenes chaos, and the billion-dollar gambles that networks lost, hit that like button and subscribe so you catch what's coming next. Now let's get into it. You can't understand why 1995 was so brutal without understanding what changed in January of that year. Up until that point, Americans had 4 broadcast networks splitting the primetime pie: ABC, CBS, NBC, and Fox, each carving out their share of the audience. That changed on January 11th when the WB launched, and 5 days later on January 16th, UPN followed right behind. Overnight, the television map went from 4 networks to 6, and every single one of them needed new programming to fill their schedules. Cable television made everything worse. Around 43% of the primetime audience belonged to the Big Four, and that number kept shrinking as cable channels multiplied. Split that dwindling pool 6 ways instead of 4, and suddenly every network fought over a smaller piece of a smaller pie. Networks ordered more shows than ever, promoted them louder than ever, and killed them faster than ever. The patience NBC once showed a struggling little comedy called Seinfeld during its rough early years had completely evaporated. If your show didn't deliver ratings from night 1 in 1995, you were finished. With all of that in mind, let's start the countdown. Number 10. Charlie Grace on ABC. Our list begins with what might be the most ironic cancellation of the entire decade. Mark Harmon starred in Charlie Grace, and yes, we're talking about the same Mark Harmon who would go on to anchor the most watched show on television for 20 years. But in 1995, that future didn't exist yet, and ABC handed him a Los Angeles private eye drama that became one of the fall's first casualties. What makes Charlie Grace worth remembering isn't just that it failed, but how spectacularly ABC set it up to fail. The network decided to launch 3 brand new dramas on Thursday night all at once, stacking Charlie Grace at 8 o'clock, The Monroes at 9, and Stephen Boschko's Murder One at 10. That kind of aggressive scheduling gamble almost never works, and this time it backfired completely. September 14, 1995 was premiere night, and by October, the show was already gone. Only 6 of the 9 produced episodes ever aired, with Friends and Murder, She Wrote, devouring the competition across the dial. Here's the part that stings, or maybe the part that's hilarious, depending on how you look at it. Harmon landed on NCIS in 2003 and became one of the biggest stars in all of television. None of that was visible in 1995, when he was just another face lost in the crowd. Number 9. Bless This House on CBS. Take one of the most controversial stand-up comedians of the late 80s and early 90s, Andrew Dice Clay, and try to reinvent him as a lovable sitcom dad. That was the pitch for Bless This House, a Honeymooners-style blue-collar comedy created by Bruce Helford that paired Clay with Kathy Moriarty. To distance him from his raunchy stage persona, the credits billed him as Andrew Clay, which fooled absolutely no one. September 11, 1995 marked the premiere, and the show limped along for 16 episodes before CBS pulled it in January of 1996. Reviews landed hard, with Entertainment Weekly handing it a C and calling out the show's relentless parade of lowbrow humor. But the real legacy arrived years later in 2002, when TV Guide assembled their infamous list of the 50 worst TV shows of all time. Bless This House claimed the number 48 slot. That's a very specific kind of immortality, the kind where people remember your name only because of how badly things went. Number 8. New York News on CBS. Mary Tyler Moore remains a television icon, the woman who redefined the modern TV comedy heroine back in the 70s. When she returned to series television in 1995 as the hard-charging editor of a New York tabloid, anticipation ran high among critics and audiences alike. A cast that included Gregory Harrison, Madeline Kahn, and a young Melina Canacredes only amplified the buzz. None of that mattered because CBS scheduled New York News directly opposite Seinfeld, the biggest comedy on television. Against that kind of competition, the show never stood a chance. Reports surfaced that Moore herself grew dissatisfied with how her character developed and wanted out, but she didn't have to wait long for an exit. CBS pulled New York News on November 30, 1995, barely 2 months after its September 28 premiere. A beloved name and a stacked cast meant nothing when the time slot amounted to a death sentence, And in a year with 42 new shows jostling for attention, even a legend could get buried without a trace. Number 7. Deadly Games on UPN. If you were a kid in 1995 and stumbled onto this one, it probably blew your mind for about 3 weeks before it vanished from the schedule. Deadly Games centered on a scientist whose video game villains somehow materialize in the real world and start causing havoc, with Christopher Lloyd playing the main antagonist and Leonard Nimoy serving as executive producer. On paper, that lineup of talent looked fantastic. On screen, the show burned through money on special effects while sitting in one of the worst time slots on television, Tuesdays at 8 o'clock on UPN, directly opposite ABC's powerhouse comedy block of Roseanne and Home Improvement. 13 episodes were produced, but only 12 ever aired in the United States because the finale never made it to broadcast. The run stretched from September 5, 1995 to roughly January of 96, and then Deadly Games simply disappeared. What happened to this show reflected a much larger collapse at UPN. Star Trek Voyager turned out to be the only series from the network's entire inaugural lineup to survive its first year, which meant every other show on UPN's schedule got canceled. When your whole network functions as a graveyard with one headstone still standing, the business model has a serious problem. Number 6. Live Shot on UPN. UPN struggles ran deeper than any single cancellation. This newsroom drama set in Los Angeles featured genuinely ambitious storytelling for its era, including a serialized murder mystery that ran across multiple episodes, and a closeted sports reporter whose coming-out arc played through the season. Both of those ideas would become standard television fare 20 years later, but in 1995 they were still unusual and risky. 13 episodes aired between August 29, 1995 and January 9, 1996 before UPN pulled the plug. The murder arc reached no resolution. The fallout from the coming-out storyline went completely unexplored. Everything just stopped, mid-sentence, with no closure for anyone who had invested in the characters. A stronger network or a less chaotic year might have given Live Shot the room to find an audience. On UPN in 1995, that kind of breathing room didn't exist. Number 5. The Single Guy on NBC. This entry breaks the pattern of everything else on our list because by the raw numbers, The Single Guy counted as a genuine hit. A consistent 4th or 5th place finish in the Nielsen ratings would make any show a crown jewel in most seasons on most networks. And yet The Single Guy still belongs on a list of the biggest flops of 1995, and the reason comes down to one thing: location. Brad Hall's sitcom starred Jonathan Silverman as a single writer in New York, with Ernest Borgnine and Ming Na Wen filling out the supporting cast, and it premiered on September 21, 1995 in the most coveted half-hour on television. That 8:30 Thursday slot on NBC sat directly between Friends and Seinfeld, the twin pillars of the must-see TV lineup. Critics saw right through it, dismissing the show as a pale imitation of the two giants flanking it, and NBC reportedly shared their disappointment despite the strong ratings. Proof came when the network moved the show out of that protected slot. Ratings collapsed from the top 5 all the way into the low 60s, with the show hemorrhaging nearly 2/3 of its audience once it lost its neighbors. The run ended in April of 1997, and The Single Guy entered television history as the ultimate example of borrowed success. When your numbers depend entirely on the shows around you, you're not a hit. You're a placeholder, and placeholders always get replaced. Number 4. Nowhere Man on UPN. From a show that faked its way to high ratings, we moved to a show that earned every bit of praise it received and still got canceled. Nowhere Man stands as one of the great lost opportunities in 90s television. Created by Lawrence Herzog, the series starred Bruce Greenwood as Thomas Vale, a photojournalist who wakes up one day to find his entire identity erased, his wife claiming not to recognize him, his friends denying they ever knew him, every trace of his existence wiped clean. 25 episodes aired between August 28, 1995 and May of 1996, running Mondays after Star Trek Voyager. TV Guide praised it as the season's coolest show, and critics responded warmly to its blend of conspiracy thriller and identity paranoia. None of that translated into ratings on a network most Americans couldn't even find on their dial, and UPN canceled it after a single season. Nowhere Man has since become one of those titles that TV obsessives bring up in reverential tones, a show that tackled complex serialized storytelling before that approach became fashionable. Landing on Fox or NBC might have turned it into a phenomenon on the level of The X-Files. Instead, UPN buried it, and all that remains is a brilliant, frustrating footnote in television history. Number 3. seaQuest 2032 on NBC. Picture yourself as Roy Scheider. You headlined Jaws, you earned an Oscar nomination, and now you're stuck in a television show you've come to openly despise. That was the reality behind seaQuest, the Steven Spielberg produced undersea adventure that launched with enormous promise and ended in something close to a public meltdown. $30 million funded the first season alone, working out to roughly $1.3 million per episode, and placing it among the most expensive shows on television. The pitch sounded like prestige science fiction: submarines, futuristic technology, deep-sea exploration. But by season 2, the quality had drifted so far from that promise that Scheider stopped pretending to enjoy the experience. When he spoke to the Orlando Sentinel, his words left no room for interpretation, describing the show as Saturday afternoon junk for children, old and tired time warp robot material that felt like a collision between a teen cop show and a discount space opera. A retool and a new title brought seaQuest 2032 back for fall 1995, with Michael Ironside stepping in as the new captain after Scheider's departure. NBC parked it on Wednesdays at 8, and 13 episodes later, the network ended the experiment for good. Episode 57, the final one, aired on June 9, 1996. 3 seasons, $30 million in first-season costs alone, a Spielberg production credit, and the star of one of the biggest movies ever made, and none of it proved enough to keep the show alive. Number 2. Central Park West on CBS. If seaQuest collapsed in slow motion, Central Park West face-planted at full speed in front of everyone watching. CBS had suffered through a disastrous 1994-95 season, desperately needed a hit, so the network turned to Darren Star, the creator of Beverly Hills 90210 and Melrose Place, to build a glossy Manhattan soap opera that would put CBS back in the cultural conversation. Their promotional tagline dripped with confidence: so hot it may just set your TV alight. Roughly 9.7 million viewers tuned in for the September 13th premiere, translating to a 7.5 rating and a 12 share, which ranked 61st for the week. Ratings only slid from there. Marielle Hemingway, Metian Amick, Lauren Hutton, and Ron Leibman led a cast that couldn't stop the bleeding. A 6.2 household rating and a 10 share represented the season average, placing Central Park West 115th out of 124 shows for the entire 1995-96 season. 115th out of 124. CBS pulled the show in November after roughly 9 of the initial 13 episodes aired, and then the desperation really kicked in. Executives wrote out Hemingway, brought in Raquel Welch and Gerald McRaney, rebranded the whole production as simply CPW, and relaunched in June of 1996. None of it worked. Final cancellation arrived on June 28, 1996, after 21 total episodes. Central Park West shows exactly what happens when a network bets everything on a famous name and a loud promotional campaign while forgetting that the show itself still has to be good. Number 1. Space Above and Beyond on Fox. Our number 1 spot belongs to the show that may be the single most heartbreaking cancellation of the entire decade. A series too ambitious for the time slot Fox gave it and too expensive for the ratings it delivered. Glenn Morgan and James Wong, 2 writers who had built their reputations on The X-Files, created Space Above and Beyond as a military science fiction drama about a squadron of young Marines fighting an interstellar war, a show with real character depth and genuine emotional weight. Fox scheduled the premiere for Sunday, September 24, 1995, placing it in the 7 o'clock family viewing hour, directly opposite CBS's unstoppable 60 Minutes. Per episode costs ran in the range of $1.5 to $2 million, making it one of the most expensive productions on any network. Morgan and Wong had mapped out 5 seasons of story. Fox gave them 1, canceling after 23 episodes despite 2 Emmy nominations and a Saturn nomination. And this is where the story turns from sad to defiant. When the creators learned cancellation was coming, they wrote the finale as a deliberate cliffhanger, not because they expected a reprieve, but because they wanted the show to end on its own terms, even if those terms included a gut punch that would haunt fans for years. Space Above and Beyond wasn't a bad show, wasn't a misguided concept, and didn't deserve to fail. What killed it was the same set of forces we've been talking about this entire video. Too many shows chasing too few viewers across a schedule so packed that even quality couldn't guarantee survival. The cult following it generated remains one of the most passionate in all of 90s television, with fans still pushing for a revival nearly 30 years later. Conclusion. And that's the real lesson. Buried inside 1995, bad shows fail every year and nobody mourns them. What made this season different was that the system itself broke. 6 networks competed where 4 had struggled, cable stole more viewers every month, and pilot costs for a single hour of drama soared past $2 million. Some of these shows earned their cancellations. Andrew Dice Clay was never going to become America's favorite sitcom dad, and Central Park West offered style with nothing underneath. But others like Nowhere Man, Space Above and Beyond, and Strange Luck were doing the kind of complex, serialized, genre-bending work that cable networks would turn into a gold standard a decade later. 1995 marks the year the old broadcast model started cracking for good. Audiences fragmented, budgets ballooned, and networks responded not by getting smarter, but by getting louder, hurling more and more shows at the schedule, hoping something would connect. Friends survived, Seinfeld thrived, ER dominated, but for every show that found oxygen in that environment, a dozen others suffocated before anyone noticed they were there. If you grew up watching TV in the 90s, you probably flipped right past most of these shows without a second thought. Now you know what was happening behind the curtain, the panic, the spending, the impossible arithmetic of 6 networks dividing a shrinking audience. And maybe the next time a streaming platform cancels a show after 3 episodes, you'll remember 1995 and recognize that nothing about this is new. The names change, the platforms change, but the story stays the same. Too many shows, not enough eyeballs, and somebody always gets left behind. Thanks for watching. Drop a comment and tell us which of these shows you actually remember or which ones you're now curious enough to track down. Like, subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.